Hello, this is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. One of the ways that we can tell the reliability of the New Testament is when you find undesigned coincidence in it. And one of the experts in undesigned coincidences is Dr. Lydia McGrew. Dr. McGrew is here, and I spoke with her not too long ago about her book on undesigned coincidences. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and let her share a couple of them.
One from 2 Corinthians, so by Paul, and the book of Acts. So in Acts 18, it talks about Paul in the city of Corinth, and he's working, during the week. He's making tents, and then on Saturday, which is the Sabbath, he goes to the synagogue. He's not allowed to work as a Jew, and he's disputing and saying that Jesus is truly the Messiah. And then there's this very odd thing that you see it in the New American Standard Version. I think this is a clear translation. He says that when Silas and Timothy came down, or it says, the narrator says, when Silas and Timothy came down from Macedonia, Paul became wholly devoted to the word, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. Now, Paul is always wholly devoted to the word. What does that mean? It's this sort of mysterious phrase. So we sort of think about that. What does it mean that something changed when Timothy and Silas came down? And we might hypothesize, but this would just be a conjecture. Maybe they brought him money, because earlier in the passage has been talking about how he had to work during the week to support himself as a tent maker. So that's just a conjecture. But when we go to 2 Corinthians, Paul's very touchy about money, and he wants to prove that he's not in it for money, and he didn't take money from them. So he writes to the Corinthians, "When I was with you and was in need, I did not burden anyone, for the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied my need." Okay, so he confirms exactly that thing that we might just very indirectly conjecture from Acts, which is that the brethren who came from Macedonia while he was in Corinth brought him money. And it's just this wonderful little indirect confirmation of Acts. There are many, many of these in my section on Acts. And what's great about them is they're so indirect that they don't appear to be based on Paul's epistles. It does not look to me like Luke had read. Maybe he might not even have read Paul's epistles, and he certainly was not trying to base them on it because they're so indirect. So I love that about them.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Do you have any other examples of maybe from the Gospels where you've noticed some undesigned coincidences?
So yeah, there are tons of them, and I'm going to start with one that I often use because I think it helps people to get the concept of an undesigned coincidence pretty quickly. I define it as an incidental interlocking that points to truth. And I thought of that after I wrote the book. So that definition I just gave you is not in the book, an incidental interlocking that points to truth. And we could see this in our own lives. Someone might say something, and then a comment that someone else makes casually could explain that. So let me give you an example here. In Matthew, it's telling the story, it's about to tell the story of the death of John the Baptist, which is going to be told as a flashback. And Herod is musing in this very superstitious way about who Jesus might be. And he says, this must be John the Baptist risen from the dead. That's why he's doing all these miracles. Now, that part is in Mark as well. But in Matthew, uniquely, it says he said it to his servants. Now, I'm a homeschool mom, and I have curriculum, and sometimes they'll write up these little things, Galileo laid down his pen and turned to his friend. It's like semi-fictionalized to make it seem a little more interesting. And you might think that that's what Matthew's doing there. He's just, he doesn't know that he said it to his servants. He just threw that in there to make it more interesting. But actually, when we turn to Luke 8, totally different context. Luke says that there were women who followed Jesus from Galilee, and he lists some of their names, and one of them is Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's household manager. So now we see how the Christian community had a connection even within the servants, among the servants of Herod. This explains how Matthew could have known what Herod said to his servants. It's just this wonderful little, totally indirect connection. I want to give one that's not in my book. So that way, people can read and get totally different ones in my book. This one I was inspired to find from Richard Balcom, though he does not call it an undesigned coincidence. At the beginning of Acts, Peter is talking about picking someone to replace Judas. Judas has gone out and hanged himself after betraying Jesus. So Peter is giving these sort of job qualifications. And one of them that he gives is that the person must have been with them from the beginning, even from the very beginning of Jesus' ministry right up until the present. Why is he so stringent about it? They have two candidates, and they throw dice or cast lots between them. Now, you might think that's kind of harsh. I mean, as long as they've seen Jesus resurrected, shouldn't that be the most important thing? Why do they have to have been with them from the beginning? Even Matthew himself, if he were to be, Jesus elected him, so his election is sure, but if they were electing among themselves by that criterion, he might not even have passed, because he was called apparently after Jesus had called some of the other disciples. So this question of why these stringent requirements? Well, if we go back to John 15, this is what's called the farewell discourse. Jesus is speaking to the disciples on the night in which he's going to be betrayed. And he says, when the Helper comes, whom I will send to you from the Father, that is the Spirit of truth, he will testify about me, and you will testify also, because you have been with me from the beginning. So Jesus predicts that when the Holy Spirit comes, those whom he's speaking to will testify because they've been with him from the beginning. Then you find this same emphasis in Acts 1. Luke says, I have carefully, these are the people who have been with Jesus from the beginning. And so then in Acts 1 it says, Jesus says, you will be my witnesses when the Holy Spirit comes upon you. So again, this connection with the Holy Spirit. Now, when Peter is doing the election, the Holy Spirit has not come yet. It's in between Jesus going back to heaven and the Holy Spirit coming. So they're waiting for this empowerment. And you could see where they might have had this very rigid, almost literal interpretation of Jesus saying that you've been with me from the beginning. We got to have somebody who's been with us from the beginning. So here we're putting together Luke's writings and John's writings to explain that election procedure that they used. And, it's funny because Jesus' words in John are often called into question as being maybe that's not really what he said. But here we find, I think, a pretty good connection with that phrase, you have been with me from the beginning, in the farewell discourse. So that's an example. I got way more, but I can stop there for now.
Isn't that wonderful? So Lydia shared some very interesting information. She's written a wonderful book, Hidden from Plain View. You might want to pick it up. And I also just recommend maybe listening to the rest of this video and listening to some other videos. I also recommend, if you'd like and subscribe, and please do come again. I appreciate the fact that you're here, and I appreciate the fact that you've been watching this. You can find me at Christian-apologist.com, or you can, of course, find me here on this YouTube channel. Thank you. Bye-bye.